Our next speaker is Mitch Rofsky. He's going to address the subject of civic engagement, the responsibility of business. Mitch is president of Better World Club, which is the only green alternative to AAA. Better World stands apart from AAA's highway lobby agenda and offers many innovative services and discounts, including the only nationwide roadside bicycle assistance. He has been devoted his entire career to socially responsible business. He was present at the creation of a number of important progressive business institutions, including the National Cooperative Bank, Working Assets, Business for Social Responsibility, and the Better World Club. He has lobbied Congress on behalf of Public Citizen, and he is here with us today. Please welcome Mitch Rofsky.
Well, as has been mentioned, I've been in business for the past 30 years, banking, mutual funds, insurance, and I'm fudging to make myself look younger so I don't get depressed at the beginning of the talk. You might ask, this is a public interest conference. What are you doing here? After all, business people are uncaring, money-hungry, and egomaniacs. Well, let me amend that. Business people have been stereotyped as uncaring, money-hungry egomaniacs. The sad thing is that stereotype has been fashioned as much by business people as by anybody else. In DC, the stereotype is nurtured, as many of you here know, by the trade associations such as the Chamber of Commerce and the Business Roundtable and the National Federation of Independent Businesses, just to name a few. I learned about this firsthand when I was working for Ralph and Public Citizen's Congress Watch up on Capitol Hill. My concentration was the banking and judiciary committees. And over again, I ran into these groups and their refusal to negotiate reasonable legislative compromises to address critical economic problems. And frankly, I was surprised. I was shocked that these groups all promoted laissez-faire economics, as if all business people were on the right wing, as if all business people thought they, believed in Milton Friedman and they were Barry Goldwater Republicans. Well, my parents were business people, but they were Hubert Humphrey Democrats. They weren't Barry Goldwater Republicans. And so I thought that represented at least as many business people in this country, maybe even more. So I sat down with Ralph and he and I discussed the need for business organizations that represent them. And out of our discussions, and then out of the work of an association of progressive business leaders, the Social Ventures Network, Business for Social Responsibility was created. Subsequently, the American Sustainable Business Council was organized for legislative advocacy, while BSR focused on corporate practice. And I was the first chair of Business for Social Responsibility and currently on the board of the American Sustainable Business Council. But obviously, the stereotype of business as uncaring, money-hungry egomaniacs hasn't changed much. And I haven't even mentioned Donald Trump by name. The fact is, business people, along with liberals and all Americans, need a new frame. After all, as Karen just mentioned, our problems remain significant. Everybody here is aware of global warming and what's going on with our environment. Everybody here is probably just as aware of what's going on with income inequality. The working class is falling out of the middle class. Now, the upper middle class is growing, but most of the working class isn't going up with it. It's not the 20th century anymore. We've dropped 6 million manufacturing jobs since the year 2000. During Reagan, manufacturing was over 20% of our economy and finance was under 10%. Today, those numbers have turned around. And obviously, that hurts the working class. So, shouldn't this be an opportunity for liberalism? Well, for one thing, I'm disappointed in the nature of how the campaigns have gone thus far. But what it really comes down to is that liberal framing is terrible. Conservatives want you to believe that the appropriate political frame is the one we've had historically, and that everyone here is familiar with. It's freedom versus the government. It's the individual versus the government. But in fact, that's not what economic policy is about. That's not the appropriate frame. The appropriate frame is, it's the marketplace versus the government. Now, conservatives believe that the marketplace is perfect, and by perfect, I mean optimal and self-correcting. Socialists believe that the government is perfect, and by that I mean optimal and self-correcting. It's only liberals who understand that neither is perfect, that both the government and the marketplace are flawed, and you need each to mitigate the flaws of the other. Liberalism is not becoming socialism. Despite Bernie Sanders, liberalism is not becoming socialism. As a matter of fact, if anything, it's vice versa. If you look at socialism, the democratic socialist countries of Europe, you will see that the government is shrinking relative to the marketplace. So take Sweden. In the early 1990s, government spending in Sweden was over 70% of the economy. Today, it's roughly 50%. And that's happening throughout Western Europe. So, if anything, as I said, liberalism isn't becoming socialism. Socialism may be becoming liberalism. Now, the marketplace has many virtues, including, including the fact that incentives, rewards, and losses are put in the right place, which is huge, and which government almost certainly won't do. But at the same time, we need business to recognize the imperfections of the marketplace and to be willing to do something about it. Here are just some of the flaws of the marketplace, and not necessarily an exhaustive list. The most obvious flaw in the marketplace is what are called externalities. Externalities are pollution. It means a business can impose its costs onto other people. If I'm imposing carbon on the entire world and don't have to clean it up, that means I don't have to, quote unquote, internalize those costs. It costs me nothing to impose my costs onto you. That is an obvious marketplace flaw. The marketplace does nothing to force businesses to internalize their costs. Another flaw is risk. And I should add that with many of these flaws, someone could stand up and say, no, that's a virtue. Yes, many of the marketplace flaws do have a positive impact, but we have to recognize that they can be both flaws and virtues, and while not eliminating them as virtues, we need to do something about them as flaws. So risk is another marketplace flaw. If you do not have the money to handle risk, you are in big trouble. What do free market economists say? Oh, they say you can handle risk, just go out and buy insurance. Well, guess what? The conference board says that over 30% of the American people have no discretionary income whatsoever with which to buy insurance. And let's take a step away from that just for a second to look at discretionary income. This is another problem of liberal framing. As you know, we're talking about inequality, and when we talk about inequality, we're talking about household income. Look how much difference there is in household income. And that's one way of looking at it, obviously. But perhaps a more important way of looking at it is discretionary income, that is income after necessities. Okay, now we're looking at the fact that, as I said, over 30%, close to 40% of the American people have no discretionary income whatsoever. And then another, 10 to 20% barely have any. So we know what happens with people who don't have the ability to buy insurance. But then we also know that if you focus in on the next, on the 20% who have a slight bit of discretionary income, people are going to make bad choices. I mean, when your money's that tight, you're not necessarily going to spend it on insurance. In fact, a book was just written recently called Scarcity, which goes into the bad decisions people make when their money is tight. So anyway, this is why we need universal insurance, as we've done with Social Security, unemployment, workers' comp, and even our bank accounts. So obviously we need it for healthcare and any other area where risk is too much for people to handle. And I want to add that national insurance is not socialism. Okay, it would be socialism if all the doctors worked for the government. But when we're talking about insurance, we're talking about having a marketplace, but mitigating the flaws of the marketplace. The next flaw is lack of freedom. Again, the free marketers just frame it in terms of government versus the market versus the individual. But no. If you have no money, you have no freedom. I've already mentioned that nearly 40% of Americans have no discretionary income, which means that they have political freedom, but their economic freedom, their everyday life freedom, is extremely limited if it exists at all. Another flaw, of course, is inadequate information. Again, conservatives say, let the marketplace handle it. People will pay for it when they need information. But when consumers don't have the money to pay for it, bad choices are going to be made. Consumers will be harmed and the marketplace will actually be distorted. And just as an aside, my company, Better World Club, is looking at one aspect of this now, which is consumers need to have information on a company's actions beyond price and quality. That's why we're looking to launch Buying Power, which will provide social ratings, including environmental, labor, safety, and social impact at the product level for thousands of products. And afterwards, thank you. We're looking to launch it before the end of the year, I hope. If anybody wants to discuss it afterwards, I'm happy to do so. The next flaw is luck. And I guess I could mention Donald Trump here. Some think that choosing your parents is a skill, but I think most of us would agree that it's actually luck. So should capitalism depend on luck and inheritance? The Republicans are going to do away with the estate tax the next time they get in power unless we dedicate the tax. The most popular taxes are dedicated. Social Security taxes, gasoline taxes. People may be trying to mitigate them. George Bush is a good example. He was trying to change Social Security, but he wasn't trying to do away with Social Security taxes. We should be looking at the estate tax and figuring out how we should dedicate it. My argument would be, let's dedicate it to a purpose that parallels what estates are about, which is inheritance. That is, we could take the $20 billion in revenue, divide it among the 4 million births, that's $5,000, put that in an equity fund for all newborns. That $5,000 at historic rates would grow to $200,000 in today's dollars by the time people are 60. And at that time, depending on their need, what we would be encouraging them to do is to give it to the next generation, so that virtually every single American would inherit somewhere between $200,000 and $400,000. Now compare that in today's dollars. Now compare that to what is going on today, when half of all Americans own no equities whatsoever, and the median that people own is roughly $80,000. So basically, you'd be changing America by turning the estate tax into capitalism for all. Now, the final flaw that I want to point out is lowest common denominator. And many times lowest common denominator, when it comes to the price side, can be good. But when it comes to wages, salaries, et cetera, it often is very bad. And that leads to our need for regulation. That's right, I'm a business person advocating for regulation, because we need regulation to deal with the lowest common denominator, as well as many of the other issues that I've already mentioned. So if I want to provide family leave, if I want to provide a higher wage, if I want to provide any number of a living wage to my employees, the marketplace just may not let me do so. Okay, we may need regulation to keep the marketplace playing field even in the best possible way. So, what's really going on is we have a new economy. As I already said, this is not the 20th century anymore. And there are just two huge factors that both business people and progressives are not facing up to adequately. The first is globalization. Okay. So how do I know that globalization is having this kind of effect? Well, Franklin Roosevelt's deficit, federal budget deficit, was 4.25% of the economy, of gross domestic product. Ronald Reagan's deficit was 5.25%. Obama's deficit was 10.25%. Roosevelt's deficit reduced unemployment by 40% in 3 years. Reagan's reduced unemployment by roughly 36% in 3 years. Obama's reduced unemployment by 20% in 3 years. So why does a deficit that's twice as big reduce unemployment half as much? Well, I would argue that globalization is the reason that our money's now going over all over the world, and it's true of any economic model. Our money, whether it's monetarism, whether it's Keynesianism, whether it's supply side, our money is all over the world, and therefore not having the same impact. There's a check on that too, is if you look at growth rates in the various recoveries to recessions, you will see that they're always declining, that they were at their peak in the early 50s, and then they've declined, and people talk about how great Reagan's economy was, but it wasn't even as good as Johnson's economy in the 60s, and again, I would argue that that's because of globalization. Meanwhile, the other huge factor, obviously, is technology and what's going on with technology. Now, of course, it's one of the toughest issues to confront because technology does create jobs as well as destroy them. But some recent economic studies have said that most of the 6 million in manufacturing that we've lost has been because of technology. How many people here know what the #1 male occupation in this country is? Anybody want to take a guess? The #1 male occupation is driving. Trucking, delivery, taxis, limos. And we're on the threshold of driverless cars, right? Uber, which is out advertising for drivers, is already started testing driverless cars in Pittsburgh. What will be the impact of that? And if driverless cars are safer, by the way, as advertised, what will happen to the jobs at body shops and repair shops? Now, as I've already noted, globalization and technology do have their advantages, and you can make a case that overall income will increase from either one of them. But should that justify it if almost all the benefits go to the top 1%, go to the top 25%? We need to be looking at what the impact of all of this is on the bottom 50%. Now, I want to be clear. I believe in free trade. I believe in free trade with Canada and Europe, countries that have similar consumer, environmental, and labor laws that we do. When we're trading with other people without tariffs or anything, then obviously we're undermining those very laws and the people who benefit from them. So we need to figure out how to get money into people's hands, even apart from work. Okay, one model, if people here or some people here might be somewhat familiar with it, was the Alaska Permanent Fund. In the Alaska Permanent Fund, people receive a check every year from oil royalties. Recently, every Alaskan got $2,000, man, woman, and child, which means if you had a family of 4, you got a check for $8,000, which is significant. We need to be looking at that at the national level. Okay, you could have carbon tax money, you could have broadcast spectrum money, you could have any number of sources that would put money into people's hands. We also need to figure out how to make it easier for employees to earn a share of the businesses they work for. And then we need the universal trust funds that I mentioned above. So, as I mentioned, we need capitalism for all, where people would still manage their money. There would still be the marketplace. They would not be dependent on the government per se, but they'd have the opportunity to grow their assets. But it's necessary because we all understand the marketplace isn't perfect. What can people here do? Well, first of all, if business people are not if you're not a business person, then you need to be talking about the flaws of the marketplace with your parents, your friends, and other business people. If you are a business person, we need you to look at Business for Social Responsibility. We need you to look at the American Sustainable Business Council. But we also need you to consider joining your own Chamber of Commerce and starting to talk about this stuff to other business people whose instincts may not be may not be ours. Anyway, capitalism for all is a form of civil engagement and a response to the new economy that business people should be able to support. Conservatives support the Alaska Permanent Fund, so perhaps they will support capitalism for all as well. Thank you very much.